Welcome back, everyone, to Arsenal Pass Time on the Round, episode 23. Today we're joined by Stephen Wooley. Stephen is the marketing director at Team Covenant, as well as being a mediocre flesh and blood player in his free time. All jokes, of course, I consider Stephen to be one of the most genuine human beings I've ever met, as well as a true Renaissance man of our time. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us, and how are you
That's
doing?
that's an amazing thing to say. That's like I'm so appreciative of that.
That's good.
Um,
Started off by
yeah,
saying, you're a mediocre flesh and blood player.
I feel like it pretty much defines our relationship. Love and complete trash talking, basically 24/7. Um, hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I just got done streaming, playing Flesh and Blood here at this very table, so I feel like I'm ready to discuss whatever it is you guys have for me. Particularly if it involves Lightning Briar and Ice Lexi, which we just played.
I was gonna say, what's getting you excited like these days? What's get you riled up?
You know,
You,
you know what gets me riled up?
mm,
Like the romance of playing things that are interesting and unexpected always gets me riled up. And on that note, like last week, Zach was bringing that Earthbriar list, right? And he was like, and I played the Earthbriar list a bunch, and I was like, this is impossible for me to beat because I'm playing like I'm on Bolton, right? Bolton. And I was bad when I played you last time we played, Brendan.
I
I did
thought
not know
that
what I
was
was
just
doing.
like a persistent state.
Yeah, well, I found my way out of it at least temporarily with this Bolton deck, and I played against Earthbriar, and I was like, this is not going to go well. And I was really at the start of the stream, I was like, okay, just getting the audience ready for how bad this is going to be, and then I won 2 out of 3 against Zach playing Earthbriar with Bolton. Like one of them wasn't even close. So that's what's got me excited. I think I'm unstoppable with Bolton. In fact, I was telling Zach, I've only lost, I think, 2 matches with Bolton after you came down.
Oh yeah,
Only 2. Yeah.
I'm wondering.
So,
You must be a big fan of this Lightning Briar list, though.
I have a lot to say about Lightning Briar, actually. I'd like to talk about. Do you want to talk about Lightning Briar?
Let's
Yeah,
do it.
shoot,
Let's do it.
rip it.
Yeah. So you guys have played Lightning Briar. Speaking of romance, this deck has no romance whatsoever. It's the exact kind of deck that the kind of player that I am is just wanting to beat with weird stuff because I just want to like subvert expectations. Um, so Lightning Briar is about the most linear thing I've seen in Flesh and Blood so far. Uh, it's not anything fancy, and I think one of the complications or the frustrations with the deck is that if you look at it as a Flesh and Blood player, you've been playing for a couple of years, you've seen aggro decks before, right? You know how Katsu, if you don't block that surging, like these things are going to happen. You've seen these things come about. We've been through the chain meta where like there's some vulnerability a little bit up front, and then it kind of has that inevitability at the end, and that's kind of at least interesting, right? Where it's like maybe if I land that red in the ledger at the right time and they're on 5 shackles, they'll take the blood dead and we can get in the game. Or if they catch the wrong cards off of their banishes, like there's some ins there to kind of take that apart. And then with Lightning Bright, it's just basically like all of the aggro decks you've already seen, but more effective and yet somehow more boring to play against.
It's like an aggro deck on like D-ball, like just straight steroid it up. Got
And
an
it's
extra card because this isn't pitch.
Yeah, it's just playing. Well, as far as I can tell, it's every 0 cost card that can attack and have go again. All the Plunder Runs, and then a few Briar cards, like the Ball Lightnings, and those kinds of things. So I think it leaves players in a place where it's like, and we've seen this in metas before. We talked about this at the end of the stream. In like other games, in many different card games that we've seen all throughout our history doing this, there's a certain simmering dislike, it's in Magic as well, I'm sure, for the like very effective, seemingly easy to pilot deck. Like it seems like it shouldn't be the case that a complex deck has a hard time beating a more simple to play deck. And so I'm not surprised that we would see over the next couple of months a lot of hand wringing about whether or not we should ban Briar cards or like, this is bad for the game and those kinds of things. But I do think this is a pretty common thing. I think it's normal, seen it a million times, and I think that there are many answers out there. It just takes a while for more complex decks to figure out their plans and their strategy because, as we said, they're a little more complex. So there's a lot more to balance and to manage to try to come on the other side of that Lightning Briar matchup. Do you guys think that it's too good?
Definitely not. I think that it's a fantastic deck. I think it's great, and I think that it's very popular, and it converts very well. That being said, I mean, there's a lot of things that exist that are not. It doesn't have a great game into, right? Like the Viscera deck, legitimately very hard, right? That combo Viscera deck, and I'm not even sure if that deck, the list that Matt played, is fully tuned yet. Is extremely hard for the Lightning Briar deck. There's Oldham, like I would look at Michael's list from the Calling. He won the Calling with it, so he beat a lot of Briars with it, and we've played it in our testing group as well. Very good list, very tough. And then of course there's Ice Lexi. So Ice Lexi is like your like legitimately like your straight counter, but Ice Lexi suffers from some consistency issues sometimes, which can allow Lightning Briar to win that match. And then, of course, there's all the decks that we haven't discovered either, but there's three right there. And I think the Viscera deck kind of at the top, right? If you're looking for a deck that, you can be competitive with, and I'm extremely competitive with, by the way, and you can beat up on Lightning Briar, like Viscera is probably where you want to be. And if Runeblade's not your thing, you're a little sick of Runeblades, then, I mean, Oldham is looking great right now, especially the list that Michael won with. It's a good list, and I'm sure that he's made a few changes since then. But a lot of stuff like Lightning Briar's game plan is so linear that, I mean, it's pretty easy to develop a game plan to attack it. We've seen game plans like this before, right? If we look back at Chain, very linear game plan to an extent, outside of Fatigue. The difference was in Chain, you couldn't attack it. Like there was nothing that actually really attacked it, right? There was like snag, but it didn't really matter. In Lightning Briar, there's an entire section of cards, like ice cards, that will attack it. And then there's alternate playstyles, like this Viscera combo deck, or just heavy disruption, which I haven't explored too much yet. But all of which are bad for Lightning Briar. I think that there's a lot of exploration to be done. We saw Canadian Nationals. Ice Lexi won that. And then, like I said, Oldham won the Calling. There's tons of options out there.
So it sounds like what you're saying is Tarek is wrong. So can you elaborate on that?
Well, that's putting me on the spot because Tarek is definitely a good friend of mine. And I do love his deck, and I do love the way that it was discovered. I think it's an important deck for Flesh and Blood. So while I get my political answer here, I do want to give the deck some praise, right? So we talk about romance. So for me, there's a bit of romance in this deck in the sense that we had aggro decks in Flesh and Blood, but we didn't really have red deck wins, for anybody familiar with Magic. This deck, to me, encompasses red deck wins, right? Like it is the ultimate aggro deck. It is the ultimate proactive, linear, kind of straightforward plan that can just dunk on most things if you're not prepared for it. So I'm happy that it's finally kind of been discovered, right? Because I think that this cements like a sort of red deck wins archetype in Flesh and Blood. I think that's really cool. So do I think that Tarek is wrong? So it depends what his actual thoughts are. His thoughts are that Briar needs to be banned or errated. I would disagree. Yes, I don't think that that's like a very popular opinion in the community right now. So I'll go ahead and kind of attack that or talk to that directly and say that I definitely disagree that Briar needs an errata. It's a good hero. It's an extremely strong hero. The hero ability is very good as well, but I do not think that it needs a ban. The next thing is the errata, right, which I kind of spoke about today. It's just like, okay, maybe we make it so that, these embodiment of Earth and embodiment of Lightning only trigger off, elemental cards, make it more thematic. Yeah. So, I mean, that's really, that makes sense. Like, but it's really simple. It's a simple idea, and I would assume that the devs probably thought of this as well. And they might have even actually had Briar initially designed like that and then changed it to buffer because it wasn't good enough. But regardless of that, I still don't think that she needs that errata. I don't think that it's that oppressive. You're going to see an overrepresentation of this deck. I'm not denying that's good, but it's going to be overrepresented because it's cheap. It's easy to understand and play to like the 80%, right? The Pareto is really easy to get to 80% proficiency with it. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of benefits to playing a deck like that in a tournament, right? Like you have shorter rounds, and generally you're going to run over most of your opponents that don't if they haven't had time to kind of react, right? If you're talking about something like Nationals where people couldn't have had time to test into it, really, you can sometimes just run over your opponents that just don't know what's going on. So I think there was an overrepresentation of this deck for kind of a few reasons outside of just its power level.
Yeah. See, I thought Earthbriar was going to do that, honestly. After I saw those Mount Heroic turns and whatnot, and I was like, man, this is going to catch some people by surprise. And Zach tanked with it.
So does
essentially.
Do you know the story behind Zach tanked with it, Steven?
Why?
Yeah.
I have some ideas.
So it's actually my fault. So
it was the wrong ratios.
Yeah. So what we did
is a genius there.
Yeah, I was well, he worked with me, but he came over and I was playing Lightning Rod. I said, Zach convinced me. So he beat me a few times, showed me that we could maybe flip the mirror. I was like, okay, I'm convinced. So we had to submit a deck list. So we get on the old Excel sheet, we're writing up the sideboard guides, and then we have like really nice functions to show all the math. And we just got really, really mathy with it, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And it looked great on paper, and it was just late, so we didn't have time to really test it. And the deck functioned like poo-poo on the day of. It was terrible. So
take that, math.
Yeah.
Hey, Steven. I was going to ask you, do you want to hear my opinion on Lightning Briar? Because I disagree with some of the things that Brendan just said. I don't know if you...
I would love nothing more than to hear... You know what, Hayden, you strike me as a romantic as well.
I can be, from time to time. I just feel like...
Would you say that you're a romantic person? You know, I don't mean like romantic like you're bringing people flowers and stuff, but, you know, there's romance, that there's more to it than just playing 0 for 4 attacks.
I like to romanticize ideas for sure, and I think when it comes to the game, I mean, I'm a big Rhinar fan at the end of the day, right? Like, you know,
right on.
I want to play that thematic. I want to brute nation, you know. But you know, as Stephen was going to say, I feel like we flipped the script, and I feel like Stephen's hosting us today, Brendan. But I want to jump in. First of all, Brendan, I kind of disagree about Chain. Just you know, I don't think Chain was linear. But anyway, that's an aside.
I just wanted to give the people something to empathize with. I would also disagree with myself that it was linear.
So you lied.
But you know, I gotta make it more palatable when I say that Lightning Briar is okay. So I gotta talk about something that wasn't okay.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll avoid that one. I'll leave that one as is. But I'll talk about Lightning Briar. And you talked about like the deck and how efficient it is, right? And like this, you know, it's easy to play. It's like accessible. You can play it at 80% pretty well, right? My like counter argument to, I guess, the strength of Briar would be a few things, like in terms of just where it's sitting right now. I think if you can play that deck at like 95%, you are like significantly ahead, because, and there's a couple of things for this, and I don't think it's detrimental, but the deck is really well tuned. The deck is very linear. The cards are interchangeable. So, you know, it's really hard for you to like brick turns or to, you know, Stephen, before we jumped on, you were talking about Ice Lexian saying, you know, I just draw a hand with no arrows. You don't really get those hands with a deck like Lightning Briar, right? Because the cards are so interchangeable. You can draw 4 non-attack actions, right? But if you've just made 2 embodiments the turn before, those cards defend for 4, or you know, taking 1 turn off with a deck that has 5 card efficiencies and gets to outvalue your opponent by 1 card every turn that's not the end of the world, right? Whereas, you know, for maybe the Ice Lexi deck, if you take a turn off, you're probably going to get hit for like 20 damage if you're playing into the Briar matchup, or, you know, maybe it's a bit excessive, but somewhere around there, right? And I thought you raised a good point, Steve, as well. You talked about like there's decks like this in other card games and Magic and people, there's a discourse around this kind of thing. And I really compare it to like a red deck wins in Magic, right? Which is like the start of a format. It's like one of the best ways to attack a format is like the super low to the ground aggressive deck, because people's decks aren't tuned. People don't, you know, haven't discovered certain things yet. The meta is really new, right? It's really raw. And I think we get a bit of maybe that might happen, say, in a game like Magic that's, you know, been around for a while. You've got online data, you've got online events. You might have that for like 2 weeks maybe. And even now you get that for like a weekend max because of the online programs they have. But in Flesh and Blood, like, you know, it's so young. The player base is so much smaller. It's there's less information traveling around. I think that kind of time period that you get of like maybe 2 weeks in other games, you get that for like months, or if not majority of the formats still at this point. And I think that's why we're seeing something like a Lightning Briar. I don't inherently think that it's like unbeatable, or I do agree with Brendan in that regard. But I think the reason that we're seeing it overperform or do well for longer than maybe it would if it was a sort of a function or an archetype in a different game is like this idea that we just maybe don't have the right information. But I will caveat that by saying that I think when this deck is played at like 90-95%, the deck is very, very good. And I'll just leave that by saying that I think Plunder Run is a very good card.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been my kind of transition. Is that like if people really want to pull out their pitchforks and there has to be blood, then I mean forget about Briar. Let's look at Plunder Run because Plunder Run is a continuous offender in the format.
It's
Totally fair.
generic as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I know that's the case because Zach's been running it literally since day 0 of our Flesh and Blood experience. He was like, I don't know anything else, but I know that this card is obviously great. And it turns out he was right. I fought him on it a bunch, but he's right.
Well, it's
Which
just
is a bummer. I hate that.
It's just a card, right? That says it replaces itself effectively, but also it replaces itself in whatever attack possible on a chain, right? It's not one upfront on hit trigger. It makes your turn potentially threaten like an on hit trigger for the whole turn, which is really can be impressive. And then also adds to breakpoints, right? Whether it's 1, whether it's +2, whether it's +3, adds to breakpoints, plus adds that 3, 2, 1 damage. So just the amount that the card brings and spread across, it's like you slap your piece of toast down, you spread that butter across. Plunder Run really gets to the corners,
Well, yeah, and I see it a lot, obviously, with him being a Roam Blade player, just because it's also solving one of the conditionals of that class. Like that entire class is revolving around non-attack actions. So like you're getting what is obviously designed to be a fairly laborious or like difficult thing to do consistently. Like you're able to hit that non-attack, replace it, and still get extra damage. That's where it really sings, and we see it being really good in those kinds of decks, right? It's really good in all the Roam Blade decks. So fair enough.
I like that I just
figured it out.
Set those up for you, and you just knock that down with the final day talking about why it's good in Roomplay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, we've been doing this for a little while, so you set up those dominoes, man. I'll hit them every time.
Yeah. So I think if there must be blood, we can talk about
Plunder.
Plunder Run. But Steven, you're a famous Azalea player. Can you talk to me about what drew you to that hero? And then I want to add on to this question. Well, part 2. Are you you played a lot of card games, obviously. So in other games, are you that player as well? I think that there's like this, what do they call it? There's like the Spike, the Jimmy, and the Timmy or something.
The Johnny.
The Johnny, yeah. And you're the Johnny, right? Like you like to play the kind of underdog, right? You like to find something new.
Off meta.
Yeah, I think the romance comes into it there. I've been thinking about that term a lot in my life recently. Actually, I talked about it a lot on the most recent podcast that we did on the Covenant cast, where it's like there's this, and we see it in even these recent card games like Nostalgics and MetaZoo and these kinds of games. Like there's this idea that you can do something that has become like efficient and obvious, and you can kind of go back to the kind of primordial stage before it all was refined, and there's a certain kind of romance to that. It's like I compare it to like cooking a cast iron skillet versus like using a nonstick, right? Like the nonstick is obviously where science has led us, but there's still some kind of romance to like taking care of the skillet and making it nonstick over time, even though it is certainly less ideal. But in response to like games, I guess I kind of have that attitude, that philosophy. I tend to be interested in things that are gonna surprise people. Or like subvert expectations. I use that term a lot, and just things I like to play. And as it turns out, I think a lot of the things that I tend to like to play are just more clever than effective, because I like clever things. So it's kind of a Rube Goldberg machine happening there. But when I first played Azalea and felt the thematic nature of the arsenal cards, flowing in and out. My initial conception wasn't, why would I ever do this? Because I lose one of the most critical components of the entire game of Flesh and Blood, and that I can't tuck a card in arsenal for a reason. I didn't think that, even though that's the case, right? Like it's fundamentally a bit of a problem that you don't get to have that advantage. And it causes all sorts of issues, but it feels so nice. Just the cleanliness of just shooting those arrows through. You feel that pullback motion into arsenal and the forward motion of the arrow leaving. And I guess I just kind of like archery too. I guess I didn't realize that until about this year, that like everything that I like to play also a lot of times has bows. I like Hawkeye as well, but it's the same thing too. It's like maybe archers are just always more clever than effective. Like Hawkeye's not good, right? In Marvel, he's just shooting arrows. I mean, like, that's got to be the lowest bar for superpower. Like there's people who are literal gods, and this guy's just shooting arrows. So maybe that's it. It's that combination of playing things that are clever and like that feel fun to play, And then it just so happens that a lot of times that is archer / bow centric characters. So yes, throughout my entire gaming life, that has been my MO, I would say.
Interesting. I wonder when you'll become a Kano player, because Kano is just it's a it's like a beautiful song, right? A
No,
great
but it's not. It's
it
it's
is.
like it's a monologue. It's a solo. It's like there's no dance, there's the it's kind of like it's too sudden, right? It's not there's not this kind of unraveling of advantage over time that I really get into. It's like I block for a while and I look for the opening and then I see if I can crack the boots and make it happen. And sometimes I can, sometimes I
One,
can't.
one day you'll realize there's a lot more. There's a lot more to Kano, I
I
think,
mean,
than that.
I'm
But it is a
I'm
bit
just
it is a bit one-sided. I will give you that. It's a little-
I'm just coming from like so I've always been driven by the limited formats because usually and we can go deep with this too. Like
Go deep.
whenever you strip off the essentially the added complexity of human input and you just look at the raw fundamental system at its core, the system of Flesh and Blood is completely breathtaking in the way that the interplay between two players is happening with such fundamental and similar math is creating such wildly dynamic turns is like incredibly good. And this is the case with most games. Like if you're playing them in their kind of most fundamental state, without all the cleverness of humans packing combos together and figuring out where the designers missed the one that should have been the two and those kinds of things. The games are so good to me at that stage, and I tend to like the more simplified, more fundamental things in my life as well. Um, it's funny, Brendan. I know you spent some time overseas. And we've talked about this a little bit, but like when I was in college and I was studying philosophy and Eastern philosophy specifically, I was looking at Buddhism and Taoism and Hinduism through the sacred texts as they were, not through like thousands of years of, like dogmatic tradition formed by humans. Uh, and I thought that was such a more pure experience of any particular religion. And I compared it to if somebody who was never familiar with Christianity, which I grew up with, would just look at the Bible and look at the New Testament and draw their own conclusions without the thousands of years of like human interpretation. And in a lot of ways, as crazy of a logical leap that this is, that's what I feel like limited ultimately is. It's like looking at this fundamental truth of the game before it kind of has all the human stuff put on it. So Kano does not play fundamental Flesh and Blood, period. Not at all. And so, no, I don't want
It's a
that.
different tune, right? Though, and that's what's beautiful about it is that like Kano plays a style that's just not represented in any other hero, and I think that
Yeah.
kind of mastering that style it's like playing a new game, right? It's like seeing the dark side of the moon in a
Okay.
way. I think you would like it, but I
can
did
believe
catch a
that.
little. I did catch a little nugget in what you said because I think I heard this in a stream earlier. Did you also you like translated like ancient Greek back in college or something?
Yeah, I did. I did ancient Greek. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did Latin as well. So did you do it just
Right
because
on.
like you wanted to get back to the like I don't know the root of those texts or what was the idea behind that? Is it
I
similar
mean,
to what you're saying? Getting to
yeah,
the
yeah.
core.
It actually is devastatingly relevant to everything that we've been talking about because it was one part wanting to get back to like being able to get at the fundamental truth of the translation, absent what other people have thought it was. But then secondarily, it was also because I needed to take a foreign language
There we
and
go.
I could have taken a useful one, and I decided to take an interesting one. And that tracks for my Flesh and Blood journey as well. Uh, Azalea is interesting, but not useful, ultimately. So that kind of puts me on the map way too obviously. But I guess that's just how I rolled out.
I really enjoyed your explanation, though, Stephen. I think that's one of the most beautiful explanations I've had for why someone plays Azalea, and probably and the best, to be honest. And you know what? When you said that, you actually gave me words to put into so I played Azalea for like nearly 3 months straight. Just played Azalea at the back end of like Crucible of War, and I enjoyed my time. I probably wouldn't go back, but I enjoyed my time. And I felt really clever when I won games a lot of the time. Like I would, the early, the mid, the end game felt like at every single point I was crafting the game state and interacting with my opponent to do so. I felt really clever when I got to the end. And I think some of the words that you just use in the description of like how you feel when you play the game and that, come back to these core fundamentals, and even just from like the pulling back the bowstring to releasing the arrow, like I can get on board with that. I like that description and that sort of recount of why you play decks like Azalea, or why you gravitate to certain things in Flesh and Blood. And I think, personally, not for me, but like that 2 or 3 months, like I definitely got an insight to that, and in some parts were to it. And I think that's why when I think about heroes now, sometimes I'm like, I want the best deck, but I want my best deck to be interesting, and I want it to be enjoyable to play, and I want to have some, I want to feel clever.
Yeah. And another piece of that is really, I don't know if you guys have seen that Jiro Dreams of Sushi documentary of the
so good
sushi master, like lifelong dream is just like essentially finally gets down to the fundamentals. You have to have the best possible rice, and you got to break it down to that simple of a execution. But it's also playing those kinds of heroes, there's a drive to be so good, to be like so perfect in your approach to the game and your play of the game, that you can take something that is under the curve, as we were, and still beat everybody else with it, because you have spent so much time honing yourself as a player. And so the challenge of that and the exhilaration of feeling like you can do something like that in a game is also extremely appealing.
That is exactly how I feel playing Kano. But speaking of beautiful Netflix documentaries, there's another one called SOM, SOMM, and it follows a group of guys
Sommeliers.
Attempting to become master sommeliers, and it goes through the process of studying and the tests, and it's one of the most incredible documentaries I've ever seen. And it kind of, it definitely does point back similarly to Jiro Dreams of Sushi. I think that's the name of it. But in terms of like the discipline it takes, and just beating on your craft for the sake of doing it to try to achieve the impossible. I love that. Definitely a complete sidetrack from Flesh and Blood, but things like that just really inspire me. Like truly disciplined people that just grind to achieve something impossible. I love that.
I mean,
that's why you need to play Azalea.
I guess for Kano.
Yeah.
It's funny because you both have very similar reasons for doing it. It's just very different approaches and very different things that you enjoy in the process. Your process is very different, right? But it sounds like a lot of your end goals, your reasons for driving reasons, are actually very similar. That
kind of sums up our relationship. I feel like me and Steven are extremely different people, but ultimately the same person in some weird way.
And honestly, that tracks really well with what Zach and I have been noticing, in that we're pretty certain that you guys are just trying to look like us over time. Because now you've got Brendan on the blonde hair, we've got Hayden on the dark hair. I have a suspicion that Hayden is growing the hair out as we speak, so that he could pull off the Zach look.
You can't see the mullet.
I'm gonna flip the script on you and get a little, maybe so. We're gonna go. I'm growing the hair out, and Hayden's balding a little bit. So
right. So we have kind of like it's kind of there, but it's also a bit of a cross pollination. So you're the blonde, long-haired host.
We'll be there.
And Hayden is the dark-haired and slightly balding host.
Brendan's going to find himself as a solo host very soon, I think.
At least a generous word. No, I'm kidding. I love you, Steven. So I want to talk about. We talked about romance. We talked about casual play, what we enjoy doing. But let's talk about your performance, Steven, at the Calling Dallas 2020. So, Mr. Steven Wooley he flies into Dallas, gets his coffee, walks into the convention center, boom, undefeated day one. Sealed is Steven's game. What are you thinking, Steven, when you go undefeated? You're on camera. I saw your little Instagram interview. Are you thinking I can win this? Yeah. I'm the champ? What goes through Steven's mind?
Man, I'll be totally honest with you. Like, I've been playing competitive games for a long time, dipped in and out of actually competing. But an event that big, I've never done anything as good as that. Like I've done some top 32s and top 16s in Netrunner. I've won some regionals and some 50 plus people events, but I was very surprised, honestly, that was happening. And then I started thinking like, I think I can absolutely win this as long as we don't have to draft. If we don't have to draft at the Calling Dallas, I feel like I can cruise right to the top. But I have known that my drafting thought process, and maybe it's the cleverness getting in the way, is bad. Like I'm not good at drafting cards. I never have been. So I was worried going in, and of course that bore much fruit for me.
Yeah, it did.
I was right.
It was a bummer. To be honest. I wanted to see you in that top 8, and we were so close. But
so close, man. I even drafted that Winner's Whale, but then I play Tarek on Earth Oldhim as my first matchup, and it's like, well, come on. I should be playing against Briar like everybody else, and then it's easy mode for me. Easy. And he's rolling in. I've got all these ice attacks, these glacial footsteps, our Winner's Whale, and all this stuff. And he's got the defense reactions and the earth stuff, and he's constantly pitting. It's like I can't win the fatigue match. I can't out dominate him. So I figured it was done.
You had the game that you drew. Was that your winning in? If you had won that, would you have been in top 8? I can't remember. I feel like it was.
That was so annoying.
I feel like that was your. I think that was your winning in game, right? Like that was your.
Yeah. So I won the one that followed, and I think I was like 11th or 16th or something. I don't remember what it was, but I think I needed to win that one and then the next one as well.
Yeah.
To steal it for sure. But I think I was like close, even having lost that one and then winning the last one. Yeah, but that was unfortunate. I would like to know if. I mean, do you guys think there's a solution on the draw side of this? Because essentially what happens is opponent is out of deck, has no way to beat me. I'm on Oldhim, have plenty of cards left, can swing the hammer till morning. He's at like 3 health. I'm at like 7. And he, it's like, okay, time is called. It's my turn. I send a big like 7 to 10 damage attack. And it's like, maybe there's that gentlemanly spirit where it's like, okay, like I know I can't win, so we may as well send somebody to the podium, as it were, and blocks and then swings back for 2 or something, and then that's the end of the game. We draw, no cards left in deck, and so what's funny is the judge is there, right? It's just a judge watching, and so my opponent's turn ends. Great opponent. Otherwise, I should have forced faster play. I can accept that. But judge is there and then is like, all right, given that there is no clear winner at this stage of the game, it is a draw. Like that official judge gavel comes down. And I was like, can I actually prove to you that there is a winner of this game? Is that even legal? And then he was like, don't even joke about that or you'll be disqualified from the event.
So it's like a super sensitive topic in Flesh and
Blood.
Blood.
I get it. Like, you can't, it's got to be very structured rules. But I was in a situation in a game where like I knew that I actually very much, not even theoretically won, but was the winning player in that game 100% and didn't get the win. So every time you do withdrawal rules, it's going to create different situations for how the game functions. And like, it's going to create bad feels and good feels. I was curious what you guys thought about the current state of draws in the game.
So I'll go first. So I played the Calling in 2019 and the Calling constructed Auckland in 2020. So back then you could concede and there was turns. So I think was there 5 additional turns, Hayden, or was it 3?
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
5 additional turns. And you could also negotiate for concessions.
No, you couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
No,
you couldn't. So
you could concede. You definitely couldn't negotiate.
You couldn't negotiate. No, not like negotiate, but people would ask you to concede and
you
stuff.
Could ask for a concession. Yeah, you could ask for
exactly. That's what I mean. Not negotiate, but you can, because now you definitely can ask. And it would lead to very, very long timers after rounds sometimes. Like the rounds would go extremely long. So we reduced that to active player turn 0, 1 additional turn, time of the round. And then the idea behind like the core ethos is that you're not supposed to win a game of Flesh and Blood outside of playing the game. So like any sort of politics or any of this should be all gone. And it does come with like a little bit of baggage where it leads to some really poopy scenarios. But I think on the aggregate, it probably leads to a better game.
Yeah.
And I think that as you play more and you play more at like a competitive level, you become more conscientious and more comfortable kind of managing the time of the game. Because that's like the biggest trap initially, right? Or maybe your deck is just really slow. And then part of your strategy is going to be, you know, kind of encouraging your opponent to play at a reasonable pace. And that's just that's part of your deck, right? That's as important as all the cards you have in your deck is, you know, not allowing games to go needlessly long and go to time. I'm happy with the rules overall. I don't like drawing. I hate drawing. And sometimes it isn't really bad scenarios, but ultimately the overall impact on the game I think is really good. There's a funny group, not a group, but there's a funny subset of players that really loves drawing. I remember sometimes I draw people would be super not because they like the double loss, but they just get super pumped that it was like a really close game, you know?
Right.
Like, I only had 1 card left, and you're like, yeah, I only had 30 cards left, and yeah, it's a funny thing. Obviously, it's more with newer players, but yeah, overall, I think it's a positive. It's a positive thing on the game.
I think that. What about you, Hayden?
Yeah, I mean, the game is to be played, right? That's kind of my in thing, and this is one of the things that this happened in the very first calling that I played, is that we had a draw situation in one round, and I didn't concede to my opponent. It wasn't clear to me that my opponent had the game locked up. They were pretty certain they had. I wasn't clear on that. And then afterwards, James White actually said to me, he's like, I definitely wouldn't concede in that situation. You play the game to win the game. But there's certain things where I think where there's like a 5%. Like I agree with the things Brendan said about in terms of like the new rules structure in terms of like no concessions after the game started and play the game to win. And a draw isn't a draw; it's a double loss, right? It's not worth points. The 5% that I think is a bit of an outlier is exactly what happened to you, Stephen, right? Where maybe your opponent wasn't playing as fast as possible. Maybe you weren't, and there was things that could happen. But leave that aside. There's a clear end to the game there, right? Where there's no cards left in your opponent's deck. There's, you know, to them sitting there, there's no feasible way that they can win the game, knowing the cards they have in hand. If, you know, I don't know the life total situation, but I'm just guessing here. Then in that situation, that's like the maybe even less than 5% of games where this happens. That's a bit of it feels bad, I think. And I think in that situation, it really comes down to the players to make the decision. So maybe if your opponent's sitting there and they think that a draw can get them into, you know, draw on a win can get them to top 32 in cash, then they have incentive to not concede that game, right? Because maybe they felt like, well, you know, if Steven had played faster, then he would have won the game, but he didn't, and this is where we are now. There's so many things that could be going through their mind, right? But at the same time, there's also this piece of, well, you know, if I draw if I lose this, because it's not a draw, it's a double loss, I cannot make top 8. And if top 8 is my goal and I don't care about anything else, well, I have an opponent sitting across from me who, you know, I genuinely think played the game very well, and, you know, I maybe I like as well. I'm going to declare no blocks on your attack. And there's like this real balancing act, I think, because it all comes down to like the human interaction at that point, unfortunately. And I think that it's going to depend on like player by player. And I think the fact that luckily it's only going to be very small cases that this happens, like the example you gave, Stephen, I think is a good thing for the game. But there is going to be some feels bads because of it. But I would just encourage people to like probably take a step back and think about all the things that happened before that. Sounds like you've already done that, Stephen, but other people might find situations where they think that they deserve to win, but maybe there's other factors that came into it. You know, I'm not pointing fingers, but
yeah, I think the idea that, you know, players really owning that responsibility to manage the clock and understand that that's a part of the game. I think especially coming from other games where it's not quite as devastating to have a draw like it is in Fab. There's just a learning curve to like understanding that that's a thing you need to be aware of and that you need to be managing on top of just your play-by-play. So yeah, it's a good point. And I think you're right, Brendan. I there's no clean way to do it differently to make it obviously better. So in those cases, it's like, yeah, that's a pretty clean idea that it's just pretty cut and dry. Like when this happens, here's how it works. No subjective assessment required whatsoever. Because if you start getting judges involved and making those calls, oh my gosh.
Yeah. I have one criticism of the system currently, which is like you can concede if there's no way that you can win the game. I don't really understand how that rule is written or understood, but it sounds subjective, right? Like obviously there is objective scenarios where you can't win the game and the game is ending and yada yada yada. But like how far does that stretch into like, to where it's like I don't think I can win the game because it seems like it's sort of subjective and it implies that maybe you can concede at any point if like you want to, because you say I just can't win the game. But like the current way that it's kind of ruled or the way it works is like you just can't do that, and that's what I understood from playing these callings. Like you just really can't concede unless like it's so literally obvious that you can't win the game. So I feel like it sounds subjective, but then like the way it's like judged and taken is totally literal, which is weird. I think there's a bit of a disconnect right there in the rules. I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah.
That one
That's
needs to be
totally
there, I
fair.
think. That one has to be there because you can have a situation where, say, my opponent knows I have 4 cards left in my deck. I'm playing Brute. I've got 3 6 attacks and a Reckless Swing, and there are 1. My opponent could just, but maybe I have no way to push damage. My opponent doesn't attack for the rest of the game. I don't attack. You can get these standstill parts, and it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen? Like, does one player need to concede? Like, is there a part here? It could be I have 1 card left in my deck, right? It's a yellow card, and I can attack with a club. My opponent has, I don't know, a Tunic Resource and a Steelblade Shunt. Like, that's the last card left in the deck. Like, there are situations where it's like, I could just do nothing. But then, like, who's the winner here? There's no clear winner. Like, it's...
Yeah, my qualm is like the interesting part is where objective meets subjective
Yeah,
and
I agree.
how far you can push the line of subjective. So like that's just where it's unclear and like I would prefer, in my opinion, I think that what it should be is that you can concede if you think, not if the judge thinks, not if your opponent thinks, if you think that you can't win the game, you concede, which just means you can concede what you want to, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with
Yeah, that
that.
seems fine, right?
Nobody can ask you to do it. Like there's none of that stuff. But this current thing where I've seen people that like they actually can't win the game, but it doesn't look like that to the judge who doesn't really play, and like
Right.
they're what's on the line is getting DQ'd from the tournament. They can't like so it's a weird place, and I hope that it's at this point a bit they like kind of flush it out a bit. But anyway, Steven, I know you're short on time. So before I
Gotta go get
kind
my
of
pump on.
gotta get your pump on Orange Theory. Oh god, I have some funny stories about Orange Theory.
I can't wait to hear those stories.
Oh,
I would love
goodness.
to hear that. We could crack into those next time.
Why don't you go ahead and shout out all your socials, all your stuff, plug Team Covenant. You got any cool stuff coming up soon?
Yeah, great. So we're running a Fab Foundations video series. We've got the second one coming out. It should be this week. I'm proofing that currently, and then we've got like 4 to 5 more in the tank, and then we've got plans for more than that. So we're trying to make kind of a comprehensive video series that's going to take players from starting the game, understanding the rules, and then all the way between that and kind of mastery of the game. So some of those fundamental concepts are going to be broken down by ProQuest champion Zach Bunn and me. And then we've got some majestic tokens that we really dig for just clarifying board states in the game, something we do with most of the games that we support. Just if we can offer some value to players to kind of help some of the more fiddly parts of a game, and you can find those on our website. And then we've also, my favorite thing that we're doing right now is we've got a Discord league that goes every Tuesday night on our Discord server. It's like $20 a month to be a part of it. You can find that on our website as well. You can just hop in the Discord and ask about it. And it's just every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock Central, 100 plus people come onto the Discord, get paired up at tables, virtual tables, play over webcam, win some promos, nothing tied to winning and losing. It's just participation only. And it's a fantastic microcosm of kind of this game and just incredible people playing. So anybody who's interested in that, you should absolutely do it, regardless of your skill level. It's a great place for everybody to be.
Awesome. Well, Steven, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's always a absolute joy to talk with you. And I hope to see you soon again, whether that's 2022 events or maybe I'll sneak up to Tulsa or hopefully you come back down to Dallas because we've got business to do down here.
Me too. And I appreciate you guys having me on and just doing the work that you're doing. You know, we've been in the grind for so long on the content, and you guys are putting out a lot of content. It takes a lot of time, and it's very much appreciated by everybody, I think, in Flesh and Blood. And then, me, of course, specifically, because I watch a great many of your videos, and I appreciate that. And it's always nice to come home from work and put on whatever you guys are up to. So Thank you for being a part of it.
Well,
Thanks, Steven.
thanks again. So that'll be active player turn 0, 1 additional turn. That's time of the round.